What's up? It's Susie from HeyGrillHey.com, and today we are tackling Brisket 101. Now, if you've never cooked a brisket before, at the end of this video, you will have everything you need to successfully knock out a brisket your first try. We're gonna talk about picking a brisket, what a brisket is, how to trim it, how to season it, how to smoke it, and we're doing basics, simplest way possible so that you can achieve a brisket without worrying about all of the overwhelm and intimidation that sometimes comes from cooking a piece of meat like this. Brisket is an American barbecue staple, and it really gained a lot of its notoriety through the Central Texas style of cooking brisket, which is what we're gonna imitate today. A brisket comes from the pectoral muscle of the cow. A whole packer brisket like this, which is what you're gonna wanna buy, consists of 2 overlapping muscles. Typically in the cryovac package like this, they'll run anywhere between 11 to 18 pounds. When picking out a brisket from the store, I like to pick either choice or prime. Those higher fat content briskets are gonna leave you a better finished product. Another thing I like to look for in the store when I'm picking it out is how well does it bend? If it can give me a little U shape, I'm pretty happy with that brisket. It'll come home with me. There is a thick layer of fat that runs between these 2 muscles, and if it's too thick, it's really not gonna be very bendy, and that means they're gonna have a lot of fat inside the brisket itself. It's not gonna render down all the way sometimes, and I think it can be a little bit of a waste. A thinner layer of fat in between the 2 muscles generally means more even cooking, a better rendered brisket, and better final texture. Once your brisket's home, you can hold it in the refrigerator. I actually like to pop mine into the freezer for about 30 minutes before I start trimming. Really cold fat and really cold brisket will make the trimming process so much easier. To trim up your brisket, all you need is a big cutting board, a sharp knife, and a pair of gloves. Honestly though, I did not have a big cutting board the first time I ever trimmed a brisket. I just trimmed it right on my countertop and then sanitized after. Let's get into trimming this brisket down. Now, I usually plan about 20 to 30 minutes to trim a full brisket. If it's your first time, it might take you 45 plus minutes. That's okay. You can rewind and watch this section as many times as you need to make sure you get it right, but I'm gonna give it to you as simple as I possibly can. Now, there are a lot of videos on just trimming a brisket. Competition trims are insane. Some backyard trims are really over the top. We're going for a super simple backyard trim so you can easily do it your first time. Using a fillet knife, I just take off any of the silver skin or stringy fat across the bottom side of the brisket. I then move on to this thick half moon shaped piece of fat and trim it down. I don't cut it all the way out, I just trim it down so that it creates a nice, flat, even layer across the bottom of a brisket. Next, I turn my attention to the sides. A long, straight cut up either side will take off any excess fat or anything left over from processing. Then I focus on the ends of my flat. The flat is the thinnest part towards the end of your brisket. You can see it's pretty uneven, so I like to round the edges and trim it off so it has a more even thickness throughout. These thin edges are just gonna burn up if you leave them on the brisket anyway, so it's better to trim them off before you even start smoking. Next, I turn my attention to the point, which is the thicker piece of the brisket on this end. This is where the 2 muscles overlap the most. Similar to the flat, I take off any pieces that are overhanging, hanging loose, and give it a nice round final appearance. Once my underside is done, I flip my brisket over and turn my attention to the top. Now, the goal here is to simply get this brisket down to about a 1/2 inch layer of fat across the top evenly. There are some places where it's less and some places where it's much thicker. I like to take the thicker pieces down to, like I said, 1/4 to 1/2 inch and then leave the rest alone. If you have any large overhanging pieces of the point, I also trim those down at this time. Now, you might be worried about what to do with all of those trimmings. I separate mine into 2 piles. The brisket trimmings where there's a good amount of meat still on the trimming, and the fat pile where it's mostly just that thick white fat. I save the meaty trimmings in a freezer bag, pop them in the freezer, build them up until I have enough. And then once I have enough, I chop or grind it to make my own ground beef. It's great in bolognese, it's great for brisket burgers. It's absolutely delicious. You paid for it, don't waste it. Now with the fat, I make my own beef tallow. I like to use this as a cooking fat to roast potatoes, a bunch of other food. I use it on my griddle all of the time. I have a full video for making beef tallow at home if that's something you want to tackle as well. Once your brisket is trimmed, it's time to season. I like to slather mine with yellow mustard before hitting it with my beef rub seasoning, but you can use equal parts of coarse kosher salt and coarse black pepper. Salt and pepper is really all you need to season the brisket. The mustard acts as a binder. It also helps create some of that texture on the outside for the smoke particles to cling to while it's cooking. I think it gives you a really nice, dark, beautiful, crunchy bark. But you don't actually taste the mustard flavor at all. If you are vehemently opposed to mustard, you can skip this entirely and just go straight to seasoning. Now that the brisket is trimmed, slathered, and seasoned, it's time to hit the smoker. I like to run my briskets at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Pop my brisket on there. I'm cooking this on a pellet grill. I think it's a great beginner smoker to use for your first time cooking a brisket. And because the heat from my pellet smoker comes from the bottom, I'm going to put this guy on fat side up to start, and then I'll show you in the next step, I'm gonna flip it fat side down to finish. I think it gives me a nice even cook all the way through. My favorite woods to use when smoking a brisket are a combination of oak and cherry pellets. You can use your favorite wood at home. It's gonna be smoking for such a long time and at such a low temperature, you will be able to actually taste the flavor in the pellets themselves. So choose a wood that complements beef. Like I said, oak and cherry are my picks. Now, when you're a beginner, I know it's tempting to want an exact time and temperature for a brisket cook. I'm gonna give you my best estimation, and then I'm gonna tell you add on 2 hours just to be safe. I usually plan about 90 minutes per pound, and that's trimmed weight. So if you trim your brisket from 15 pounds down to about 12, you plan 90 minutes per pound. Your total cook time is gonna come in around 18 hours. Now, your brisket might or could possibly or will likely be done before that, but that is okay because we're gonna build in some rest time at the end of our cook. So this seasoned brisket is going on the smoker, 225, close the lid, let it go for at least 6 to 8 hours before you crack open the lid and take a peek at it. We want our bark at this point to be dark and crispy and crunchy, starting to develop a lot of beautiful color, and we want our temperature anywhere in the range of about 160 to 175. Once we've hit that target with our temperature and the outside of our brisket is starting to look the way that we want it to, I like to wrap it in butcher paper. Butcher paper is untreated paper that's perfect for finishing out this brisket. It holds in some of the moisture, but still lets that bark develop on the outside without softening. I've also used unwaxed parchment paper, so not the waxed parchment paper or wax paper, that would be terrible, but unwaxed parchment paper has helped me out in a pinch when I didn't have butcher paper on hand. Our wrap brisket is going back on the smoker until it is done. Now, the range for finished here can happen anywhere between 195 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit. There's not one perfect temperature for a finished brisket. What you're really looking for is for your thermometer probe to slide in and out of that brisket like it's sliding in and out of softened butter. Also, squish your brisket a little bit. See how it feels. If it bends and gives beautifully beneath your hands, your brisket's gonna be nice and tender. At this point, it's time to pull your brisket off the smoker. I like to pull it off and let it rest at room temperature for at least an hour before serving. This is where planning ahead and giving yourself a few extra hours of cook time is really valuable, because if your brisket cook runs long, you've given yourself a grace period. If your brisket comes in on time or even a little bit short, you can extend the resting period for many, many hours. It's really forgiving here at the end. If you do have to rest for more than an hour, what I recommend is wrapping your brisket in a towel. Don't use your favorite, bathroom towel. It will smell like brisket for the rest of its life. Pick a brisket towel, that is now your barbecue towel. Wrap it up in the towel, pop it into a cooler or into an oven that has been heated to about 170 and then turned off, and let your brisket hold. It can hold this way for anywhere between 4 and 6 hours. I've even held them up to 8 hours if it's been a really long rest time. I actually think the longer the rest, the better. 3 to 4 hours is my sweet spot for resting brisket. So just a quick general guide of how we cook briskets is I will trim, slather, and season at night about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Get it onto the smoker before I go to bed. I do have alarms on my smoker to monitor the temperature in case the temperature shoots up or down. It will wake me up. When I get up first thing in the morning, I get a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and I check my brisket. Typically at this time, it's ready to wrap. So first thing in the morning, I'm wrapping my brisket. After I wrap my brisket in the morning, I close the lid, keep an eye on the temperature. It's usually finished somewhere in the early afternoon. And at that point, I can let it rest for quite a long time until we're ready to eat dinner. Okay, our brisket has rested. That means it is time to unveil and slice. I'm gonna give you a couple of quick tips for slicing your brisket, because with all of the time that you put in to smoke it and get it ready, you wanna slice it just right at the end. My gosh, look at that. That is a juicy brisket. I'm gonna save these juices. I'm actually gonna drizzle them on after I'm done slicing. You can see how much this brisket shrinks down. It is what it is. It's part of the process. All of that fat has rendered down to a delicious, gorgeous brisket. So, because we have the point on this end, the flat on this end, and there are two overlapping muscles with grains that run two different directions, we have to slice them in two different directions. So I'll typically take my knife and slice into my brisket right here, just to separate kind of those two main chunks of my brisket. Look at that inside, no squeezing necessary. That is a gorgeous, juicy looking brisket. So my point gets sliced. It gets turned 90 degrees before it gets sliced into about pencil thick slices. And then my flat, I'll just slice straight across. Same with the first cut that I made. This first piece on the end right here is actually going to be what I cube up. And these kind of become my burnt ends. But also, being the one that smokes the brisket means that you get this magical privilege of taking the first bite. And this is always the best bite, these caramelized crispy edges of this point. That's money. That's how you know you figured it out. This was a simple brisket. We didn't overcomplicate anything. Simple trim, simple seasoning, simple smoking process, couple of tips and tricks, and you end up with a smoked brisket that looks like this. Dripping juice, bending over the knife, so tender, but not totally falling apart. That is a backyard brisket worthy of having all of your friends and family over. Now this was a beautiful brisket. Not every brisket I've ever cooked in my life has turned out this nice. And I will say, practice brings improvement. So hopefully your first brisket turns out this lovely. Maybe your second won't, maybe your first one won't. What I don't want you to do is give up, okay? Sometimes good things take practice and they take time. Brisket is one of those things, but I am fully confident that you can master the skills. If you want to go even deeper than just this quick Brisket 101 tutorial, you can check out thegrillsquad.com. I have a full 30-minute brisket pitmaster class that covers all of this and more. So if you want to go deeper into the world of barbecue brisket, I've got you covered. If you have any more questions for me about brisket, or if you have any other ways you cook brisket at home, leave a comment in the comment section below. I do read all of them. I want to be kind of your backyard barbecue guru. I want to help you make better barbecue at home, give you the tips and tricks and the confidence that you need to make really great barbecue for your friends and family. So leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to enjoy this brisket with my friends and family. Wow. We'll see you guys next time. That is beautiful.